Hello and welcome to Season 6, Episode 14 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading James Hitchcock's History of the Catholic Church from the Apostolic Age to the Third Millennium, this time talking about Chapter 10, Reason Revolution, really the first parts of it, sort of almost the first half. Really don't get into too much of the revolution stuff at this point in time, but really just kind of looking at the aftermath of a lot of like the Reformation, Counter-Reformation policies, and everything like that that's going into place in the Catholic Church. We're also in person today because I'm home for midterm break, so hopefully it's a better episode than our Zoom episodes.
Well, it can't be much worse. That's what our listener was saying.
That's true.
Hopefully it'll be a little bit more dynamism between the two of us.
I don't know if that's...
I think that's right.
I don't know if that's use that word.
So should we get started?
Sure.
We're going to... your summary, your pre-summary before my summary was accurate. This first section is basically kind of like setting the stage.
Yes.
We're talking about really 1500s, 1600s, really mostly the 1600s, I think, mostly.
Most part.
And talking about the different regions in the Catholic Church and its interesting struggles with the other now established religions, really, at this point. And I like this quote to begin the chapter. The author says, religion never exerted greater influence in Europe than in the period 1500 to 1660, and perhaps at no time in history was it so closely bound up with politics. But at first largely unrecognized, it was also being undermined and discredited, which they should have realized that it was being undermined and discredited. When you have religious leaders leading armies to kill other religious people.
Yes. Of the same religion.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes it was even just the Catholics against the Catholics because of whatever, political rivalry they had between them.
Yeah, that's even more stupid.
It is.
I mean, I don't know. Is there a maximum stupid? Probably. It's like you can't exceed it, like a platonic ideal of stupidity.
Yeah, I think they call that unlimited opinions.
All right, so let's talk about these as long as you're ready to roll.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, he kind of had a regional approach again in surveying what during this era, what's kind of going on. So the first geographic area he mentions kind of briefly was Spain. At this point, Spain's kind of relegated to a second-rate power compared to Germany, Holy Roman Empire, and France. But the church in Spain is more powerful within Spain than like the civil authorities. This mainly because the bishops were not necessarily just people that were picked from nobility. So they have more resonance, I guess, with the community. And there are more priests per capita than anywhere else in the world, which you'd assume would give you a little bit more influence or power in the community.
They also still had the Inquisition. I don't know if you're going to mention that. So it's still something that's going on in Spain. Still up in the 1600s.
Did you yet watch the Inquisition?
I have not. I have not.
I'm getting more and more disappointed they haven't just bothered to look up on YouTube.
Well, I always forget by the end of the podcast.
The Inquisition. All right. Well, the listeners already listened to it.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Well, the listener gets so bored in the podcast, starts scrolling through the internet. All right. So the next one is England, which is a fascinating discussion during this period of time, I thought. There's a mention of the gunpowder plot, which I don't know the details of it, but it involved the plotters using a whole bunch of gunpowder with their plan to blow up the entire parliament and all the leadership as they're gathered together. And it was a Catholic plot, right? Did I get that right? Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Yes. And one of the plot, and of course, it was thwarted, and then the plotters were executed, including some, I call them bonus Jesuits, got killed. Like they had nothing to do with it. Let's kill these Jesuits anyway. And I had forgotten. I read this somewhere, but Guy Fawkes was one of those plotters, and he was killed, executed, and that is why his caricature was used as part of anti-Catholic parties, really, I think. And so you see those Guy Fawkes. Do you know what the Guy Fawkes masks are?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, you see like Antifa people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like street protests and stuff like that. They don't really know that, it's just known as Guy Fawkes is like some sort of revolutionary or something like that.
Interesting.
But so you see that sometimes.
Well, I know that's still like a holiday in England.
Really?
Well, I don't know if it's like an official holiday, but it's still remembered like the day of the gunpowder plot. So
interesting. So I was fascinated that the kings, James and Charles I, had Catholic wives. And I have my notes that I think it was James especially was trying to, maybe it was Charles, trying to make the Anglican Church more Catholic in its appearance.
Yeah, that was Charles. So.
Charles, okay. And I have make Anglican Catholic again. So he would have been a
Macca.
Yeah.
That's great.
Trying to be have those kind of the accoutrements. I'm trying to use different words today.
You're all over the place with this.
And this is before the podcast started. I was using big words.
That is true.
But like the decorations and the where the what do you call that, altar and all that stuff, making it look more Catholic.
Yes.
If not
Marble altars, altar rails, pictures in church, heightened emphasis on episcopal authority. Is kind of what he's pushing for. Yeah.
So then he also tried to get a law passed to allow for toleration of Catholics, and Parliament said nope. He ended up converting to Catholicism on his deathbed, so that was fascinating.
That was Charles II.
That's who I said.
Yes. Well, there was Charles I was the one who was trying to the Macca guy.
Oh yeah.
Charles
I've
II,
moved on to Charles II.
Charles.
I apologize.
Yes.
I meant to mention that it was Charles. I think I did mention Charles II.
I don't know if you did. I think you just
Well,
said
if
Charles.
I said it, you missed it. If I didn't say it,
if I missed it, then the listener also probably missed it. So
our listener pays better attention than you do. We both know it. All right, James II followed, because I guess you had James, you had Charles II, then James II.
I guess so.
I should know this. I should have looked that up. So he tried to be tolerant, but he tried to do it just by an edict. To hell with Parliament, says James II. The result was he had to flee to France because they basically overthrew him because they hate Catholics. So that's all I really had about the England in that section. So
I think it's important to mention that overthrowing, that was the Glorious Revolution. That's when you finally have a solid Protestant sort of leadership then in England for the remainder of its history.
True.
Because that was then his Protestant daughter Mary II and her Netherlander husband William III to take the throne, and then James fled to France. So that was kind of the last hope for any sort of, appreciation, I guess, for Catholicism in England, some sort of toleration.
I think they're
tolerated now,
yes.
but now there's, not going to be a Catholic king of England anytime soon.
Yes. All right. I was going to say something about Anglicans, but that's all right. Ireland is the next topic that the author mentions. And he mentions that Ireland kind of proved the maxim of the blood of martyrs are the seeds of Christians, because there are a bunch of martyrs. Irish people are stubborn people, I think.
They are stubborn.
Good for them. And so therefore you are part Irish.
That is true.
You're more diluted. I don't think your mother's Irish at all.
No, because they're German, aren't they?
Yes. We're only like half Irish, I think. Some English.
Yes. Sounds about right.
And actually some French.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know that.
There's,
that's gross.
I did some genealogy years ago and I was very disappointed, so I
kept it quiet. The bishop family secret is we have some French blood in us.
Yeah, because there's a Tournois, or Tournois, I guess, but they always call it Tournois, the Chicago version of French. And so that was, I think on my mother's side, I think she might have been half French. But she had scarlet red hair in her youth. Irish Catholic family.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Yes. Anywho, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, Charles I, which we talked about earlier. Charles I of England.
Yes.
He put down a revolt because that's what the English do to the Irish.
Yes.
And then Oliver Cromwell, who was a Puritan, he initiated a brutal suppression of the Irish and seized the lands of the Catholic nobility and really oppressed the Catholic majority in Ireland. And the Battle of Boyne in 1690 was it's called an Orange victory. So it's a Protestant victory against the Catholics, primarily in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And that's really the beginning of the troubles, so to speak, between the Catholics and the Protestants. And the Protestants were really imported people from England and Scotland.
Because that's what he mentions with Cromwell, is he systematically settled English and Scottish Protestants in their place. So he'd remove the Irish and then move in some English and some Scottish people.
Yeah, but it was primarily in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So they had the populations. I don't know what they are now, but I think they were pretty much even at some point. Mm-hmm. So you have, and then they're there for generations and generations. What are you going to do with that? So so that was a big thing back when I was a kid. The IRA and the bombings and all that stuff, and then people were executed. Irish revolutionaries were executed, had long prison terms, and then they had Sinn Féin, which was a political group that was not supposedly overtly terroristic, but they were really the political arm of the IRA.
Oh, that's right.
And then there was a legalization and then a reapproachment as all that got worked out.
Yeah, because when did that end? Because that's not still going on.
That was probably, I'm trying to think. I think it was George Mitchell, who was American diplomat politician that went over there and kind of got the deal sealed between the parties. 1990s, I think it was H.W. Bush's tenure, if I remember correctly.
So it is like 300 years then.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
Yeah. And, so now they're like, it's kind of funny because, the Irish Catholics it was a Catholic, Southern Ireland, which is just Ireland, was, overtly Catholic. And then recently they've allowed for legalized abortion. And then over the last week, all sorts of Palestinian protesters. They're like,
really?
Yeah, they've imported all these people from
that's crazy
Africa and the Middle East, just like everybody else in Europe. They're part of that European Union. And right. Because, England or Great Britain pulled out of the European Union, so they don't have as much of a trouble. But if you look at London, they have, there's thousands of people protesting.
That's wild.
They probably have, in London, the most common baby name in Dublin, I think too, is Muhammad, or I think it was either Muhammad or some Islam. Obviously it's Islamic. They're gonna be taking over those islands soon enough, just demographically.
Yeah, it's wild.
Isn't it wild? Yeah,
it's crazy.
And it wouldn't be. It really wouldn't be that big a deal, except for that they're not as tolerant as the Christians or the atheists, which is most of Europe currently. They're like, yeah, you can worship Allah. And they're like, okay. You're going to worship Allah too. We're tolerant. We'll let you worship Allah. So, yeah, there was somebody that articulated it better than I'm going to now. But there's these, when you have a majority that does not identify with its culture, and won't defend its culture, a minority will overthrow it. Yeah. A minority that believes in their culture, whatever that is, their culture and their religion, and they're devout, that minority will rule that country because the majority is just diffusing any sort of, they won't vote together. They won't act together. They won't defend that culture. And they don't realize, there's so many people that don't realize that there is a culture. There was a culture in Ireland. There was a culture in England. There was and still is, to a certain degree, culture in the United States. And like a lot of people call that whiteness, but it's like, okay, well, I don't want to go down that path, but when you don't defend that kind of religious toleration that we have here, when you have a belief in an educational system, or at least educating yourself, I believe in law and order and contracts that are enforceable and all that. If you don't, that's your culture.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've been seeing a lot of, like in my classic class. I don't know if I told you about this, but for my capstone, because it's like kind of the end of my classics major at Truman. During class one time, she's like, "Okay, we're gonna have like a discussion about ethics in the classics field." I'm like, "Okay, we're gonna talk about like archaeology and like stuff like that." And respecting artifacts. No, she had us read these articles that were all about, the white supremacist roots in the classics field. This one guy whose goal it is to remove whiteness from classics, and like why blah, 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 blah is misogynistic and stuff. And like there's this idea in the classics field, which is the study of like ancient Greek and Latin, and the cultures that go along with that, which is the root of, European civilization and European culture, that, it's wrong, it's bad. And we need to anything that is sort of subversive to the field is then celebrated. And it's like, we need to remove this idea that, Europe is inherently linked to Rome and to Greece because that's racist. We need to remove any sort of concept of whiteness from it, because they were actually multicultural, but at the same time, we hate them because they're white. And so it's these different, like, conflicting, beliefs and attitudes. I'm just thinking, like, if somebody was like, okay, we need to remove blackness from our African studies department, it's just ridiculous. Everybody would see that as ridiculous. That we should see it as ridiculous to say that we need to remove whiteness from the classics department.
Well, it's even more absurd because the Greeks weren't white.
Yeah.
They weren't.
Yeah.
They were at least really dark tan. The whites were the Slavs. Were the blonde-haired slaves of the Greeks. That there was free reign to enslave those people that were the Caucasians from the Caucasus. And then, a lot of Greek culture is that Mediterranean, which is Egyptian, and the Palestinian region, not state. So to say that the Greeks were white or that had anything to do with whiteness is insane. Yeah. They didn't have the concept. And I don't know if you even study this, but they didn't have the concept of skin color race. Yeah. If you were a slave, you were just as more likely to be of white complexion or lighter complexion than you would be to be an African, like a dark skinned African slave. It's
ridiculous because I kind of mentioned this, but like the articles would contradict each other. Like the guy who was like, well, we need to remove whiteness from the classics field because really they were multicultural and they embraced all of these other regions, North Africa and Egypt and the Middle East and whatever.
And all the white scholars are like, amen, brother. That's what we've been doing.
But then, this other article was about the British Museum because everybody thinks museums are awful now because it's stealing other people's, heritage or whatever. And they're like, well, the only reason... Because like the big topic is the Elgin marbles. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's like the big marble reliefs in the Parthenon that were taken in the early 1800s. A British guy was given permission from the Ottoman Empire at the time to take them. And so now they've been arguing, they're ours, give them back. But this article is arguing, well, the only reason people care is because it's like white on white crime. If this was, a white guy taking a black person's things, nobody would care. But because the Greeks are white and because the British are white, everybody sees it as wrong. And so it's just this weird...
They're saying the Ottoman Empire was white?
They're saying the Greeks are white.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Because they're saying, it's the only reason we care is because it was a white person's things who were stolen. Oh. Like, so if you stole something from like the Congo, nobody would care. And so like, well, we need to... This is problematic. We should care more about the stuff that was taken from Africa. It's like, what are you talking about?
Well, first of all, what was taken from Central Africa? Other than people, and resources. But it's not like there were great buildings.
That is true.
Temples that were, seen as great works of art, but we've kind of gone off a little far.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's the bizarro nature, and it's just, I think, people that are intellectually unable to really be excellent scholars in the classics that went in that field because they're kind of interested in it, but they just can't pass the muster. And so they can't really interpret Greek and Latin ancient texts effectively because they won't put the time or the effort into it, or they don't have the brain power. And so they're like, well, you don't need to learn Greek and Latin if you're going to be a classics expert, a PhD in classics. That's absurd. Yeah, but they won't be able to get those positions of power unless they undermine the standards. So it's just weird. Anyway. So where was I at? I was in Ireland.
Yes.
Battle of Boyne. Oh, yeah, the priests were hunted down. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So they could go priest hunting. And then they had Irish seminaries. I didn't know this. In Rome, Spain, France, and Spanish Netherlands.
I didn't know that either.
To teach Irish seminarians. They can go back to Ireland as priests so they can be hunted down by the British, evidently. Towards the end of 1700, I think, I don't say the Catholic It was legal to be Catholic in the area, but they had to take a loyalty oath, and they weren't really able to have the same civil rights as others. But so then there's Netherlands. That's kind of a brief discussion. It was generally really still tolerant, but only barely for Catholics. But at least they had. It's kind of like the similar discussion from the previous 100 years. Mm-hmm. And there's a long explanation of the 30 Years' War. Yeah. Which I remember reading about a long time ago. I've forgotten everything about it. Mm-hmm. So I'm relearning it. So the war was essentially from 1618 to 1648. Yeah. Hence the 30 Years' War. 30 years. That's like what we do in Afghanistan. Christ. When I was younger, it was like 30 years. How could they be at war 30 years? Yeah, that's how they can be at war. You just keep being at war. Yeah. Well,
that's what the French and the English did a couple hundred years before that, the 100 Years' War, which was really 120 years. Right. Although the fighting wasn't constant throughout those years.
Interludes. But, yeah. Well, it seems like, this seems, anyway. So, I don't know how much we want to go into this, but the German Habsburg Prince Ferdinand in 1618 said, "You're all Catholic now." Mm-hmm. The Bohemian Diet, which I think is their parliament or whatever, said, "You're fired," and hired Frederick, who was a Calvinist. And I'm getting he was. Fredericks and Ferdinands. Yes. I get these confused. So Ferdinand conquered Bohemia and Hungary and declared himself Holy Roman Emperor, mm-hmm. Which I think he served 1619 to 1637. Yep. At some point, Ferdinand II takes over, and he declared that they should return to the Peace of Augsburg of 1555, which I know we discussed. I can't remember, but essentially got to return the lands mm-hmm. to the Catholic Church that were taken. And as the author explains, is only partly about religion, although the religious provided what he called a murderous passion to the fighting. Mm-hmm. Ferdinand almost won several times, but foreign powers saved the Protestants each time. First time, the Lutherans from Denmark. Second time, Lutherans from Sweden. Third time, Catholics from France.
Of course they did.
Because screw them. That's why. Screw those German Catholics. Oh, they're French Catholics. At least then they fought. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, in the last decade of the fight was really a fight between France and Spain, but mm-hmm. in Germany.
Yes.
Which I thought was fascinating.
Two Catholic powers fighting each other in Germany, in a Protestant country, because it was started because a Catholic guy wanted the Protestants to become Catholic.
It sounds like what our people in Washington, D.C. would do. I mean, it's just so absurd. Yeah. Why are we doing this? Yeah. Well, because it's our honor. If we don't do this, then what will happen? People will take advantage of us.
Yes. So we must invade Afghanistan for 30 years.
Yes. I didn't really have a problem with the invasion of Afghanistan, but at some point it's like, why are we building schools there? Yeah. And then, at the end, they had George Floyd murals.
Oh, of course.
It's
nice.
In Kabul.
Well, we have to spread our American culture.
Yeah. And rainbow flags and rainbow murals. Yeah, like a year before it fell. Oh, well. They hired people, they paid people to put these gay things.
It's poetic, I think.
Do you think that anybody who is an Afghanistan native, born and raised there, really felt a connection with the rainbow flags and the homosexual philosophy that we espouse here? I think none of them did. Even the gays are like, that offends me. I mean, it's not a way to conquer. Yes, a land.
Well, I think that is the American culture now.
It is, but there's a way to do it.
Yes,
just paint murals. I mean, you have to convert them. You have to if you're going to convert people, as we've seen time and time again, if you're going to convert a population forcibly, you got to use force, or just forget about it. Just let them practice whatever religion they want to practice.
Yes.
Human Christmas. Anyway, it's just so stupid. The stupidity offends me. Just like I'm going to mention it, the COVID stuff. It's so stupid and illogical. If you're going to believe it, do it. Anyway, so then we ended up. The fighting ended because when they entered into the Peace of Westphalia, which is Ferdinand III. Mm-hmm. So we're now under the third Ferdinand of this war.
It's a lot of Ferdinands.
And it was essentially a victory for the German princes. And the princes determined the religion of their area, which is what it was before.
Including Calvinism.
And Pope Innocent X, because, he is the successor to Jesus. He, of course, condemned the peace treaty. The more I read about the history of Catholic Church, the more I am comfortable with our current Pope being a communist. I'm just like, I don't feel so offended anymore.
Yeah, that's fair.
We had Pope John Paul. It wasn't perfect, of course, but he was a very strong proponent of just the Catholic faith and pro-life stuff and all that. Would never have. Of course, he fought against the communists in his youth. But anyway, so now I see all these other corrupt popes, and I have hope for the future that we can turn the corner. Good. Yeah, I do. Actually, it makes me feel better about the present day corruption. Because it was more corrupt before. Yeah, he's not leading armies to attack other Catholics. All right, let's see. I can't even read my notes about France. I have crazy crap involving cardinals. See book.
Oh, that's good.
I need to see what my notes were about France.
Crazy crap involving cardinals.
What page are we on here?
303, I think, is the first section of France.
Yeah. Cardinal Richelieu.
Yes.
Who's discussed throughout this this chapter is
very
a
important
power-hungry guy that ruled behind the throne, but didn't seem to be influenced at all by his Christianity or Catholicism, just about power politics.
Yeah.
So a true Frenchman. So I don't know if we want to even discuss the crazy stuff I saw there. Undermined the divine authority. So he actually invoked the divine authority of the king to silence criticism as a way to get his way and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I guess we talk a little more in detail, I think, in other
He'll
sections.
pop up again. I think there's a whole section on the French church a little later.
Right. So Poland really has had a difficult history. They used to
They're just constantly being invaded from every direction.
For sure, yeah. And I just heard an interview with it was a Polish leader. I forget. He's a politician there. Was he interviewed by Tucker Carlson? I forget who it was, but he says zero. Yeah, it was Tucker Carlson. And they're taking zero immigrants. They're like, we are a Catholic country, and we've been invaded so many times before. We're proud of being Polish. We're proud of our religion. We're not going to be taking these people in.
It's almost like that's how states work.
Yes,
generally speaking.
That's what he was saying. And he says they've taken in, I don't know, maybe millions of Ukrainians because in the European Union is not following the law with regard to refugees. Yeah. They should be going to their first safe harbor nation from the conflict. And these people from the Middle East are going through like 5 or 6. Yeah. And so they're saying, we're taking Ukrainians. We're not taking anybody who passes through Ukraine. We're not taking anybody who passes through any other country. We're taking Ukrainians and that's it. And they're getting currently condemned really because it's a religious belief by the European Union. And they're just having a vote today, I think, or yesterday.
Interesting.
Anyway, so they were split in 1772 between Catholic Austria, Lutheran Prussia, and Orthodox Russia. But the Polish people retained their language and their culture, and they really became stronger Catholics, according to this author, because they're kind of struggling against the Russian Orthodox and against the German Protestants. Yeah. So now we're all the Polish people are like, well, we're all Catholic now. So let's see, where was I at? The next section.
There's discussion on absolute monarchy and then the papacy here.
Yeah, so there's kind of a brief discussion about royal power during this time, because the feudal lords, who were in some ways a check on the power of the king, were really declining. So you have a more centralized control. And in fact, the church, quite often, as we talk about like these different pieces, like with the different princes or kings determine the religion of the area, that the church is becoming more and more subject to the state. And of course, the popes are heavily involved in politics, and therefore they're kind of negotiating these kind of things, and they're subject to these kings and the civil power. And that's really, in many ways, the start of, or really maybe strengthening of the popular sentiment about popular sovereignty theories, those kind of political thought in this era. The papacy is in declining power, and so you're starting to think, well, where does the power of the state comes from? It's not really coming from religion. I mean, these guys are just terribly corrupt, and so it's not like the Pope is saying he's king. The king is saying who's Pope. And so then you start thinking, wait a second, what really gives anybody the legitimate authority? And of course, that dawns on them. Hey, maybe it's because the people are selecting our king or our rulers. So it's the start of that kind of philosophy. So then there's I think a long discussion about religious toleration, right?
Yeah, there is.
So, and the toleration grew in the 1600s, but it's mostly a political struggle for religious toleration, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you're a Catholic, you didn't believe that the Lutherans were okay necessarily, or they're right. It's just, a political thing. Well, okay, let's have a detente so we can both go to church without murdering each other.
Less of, I respect your right to have a religion, more so I respect, my right to not be killed by you right now.
Yes, and I'll forego killing you. How about that? I'm giving up a lot, not killing you.
But in exchange, I won't be killed.
So it was Cardinal, I forgot how to Cardinal Richelieu. Yeah, he's the one that he personally led armies to destroy the Huguenots within the Huguenot forts or fortresses within France, which I think is just would be such a spectacle to see a cardinal. Yes. Did he wear like one of the big cardinal hats? I hope so. So Louis XIV, who was, I think, the longest serving monarch in European history, maybe.
Yep, that's what it says.
He revoked the Edict of Nantes. I'm mispronouncing that. Nantes. I've always read it as that. In 1685, which had granted toleration, and he even put soldiers in homes to make sure that the families and the people were following his edicts.
Wow.
What? Did I say something wrong?
No.
Okay. Clergy were condemned. Clergy condemned his actions, but Innocent the 11th congratulated him on his success.
Oh, there you go.
Although he might have privately thought it was a bad idea that you are going after these other Christians and stuff. A very brief mention in the book of Locke, which he's a very prominent philosopher about individual rights and the natural law theory, if I remember correctly. And he believed that the kind of like the freedom of conscience theory, that religion is a private matter and not really the subject of discussions with the state. And he was in favor of religious toleration, except for maybe Catholics.
Yes. So he thought they were politically subversive. So.
Yeah, and there's I could see an argument. It's a much better argument for it then, too, because the papacy was such a political force, a military force. And all
I don't know if it was you I was talking about, but that was like a big deal around JFK, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because they were like, well, is he going to serve the country first or the Pope first, as president? Oh, yeah. And of course, we don't have that conversation about Biden because
we all know he's a Satanist. Just joking. He doesn't worship anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody knows he's not Catholic, that being Biden. He just uses that as a cloak of evil for really stupid people to believe.
Very true.
But Kennedy was also not really, he was raised Catholic and they held themselves out to be devout Catholics, of course, in his private life.
He's not a good person.
But I guess it's true of a lot of Catholics. A lot of religious people, we're all sinners, I guess.
And all politicians, so.
Yeah, you kind of, it's hard to find any of their just like decent people.
Yeah.
Although, I'm trying to be less cynical. I'm trying. I'm not succeeding, but like people that strike me as kind of decent people. I'm trying to think of somebody. I'm trying to think of an example on the left. I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to be fair-minded, but like if you Hawley seems like a good person with his family. Eric Schmidt, I think, even more so. Our senators here in Missouri. I think Rand Paul seems like a nice guy, a good guy. Yeah. Married to his wife for a long time, I think. I don't know how many kids or whatever. Who else? Is there anybody else in Washington that? There's got to be somebody that left us in that's just a decent person, isn't there?
I can't really think of anybody.
They're probably so decent that you just never hear about them.
Yeah,
it's like they're not prominent. They're just going about their business.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a lot of people, especially like in the House. There's 435 of them. There's a lot who just fly under the radar and are just actually like, I want to represent my citizens and not try to get my 5 seconds of fame on TV today.
True. Good point. Yes. Are there any really good senators that are Democrats? There's got to be one of them. I don't know. So then there's a brief discussion of ecumenism. Ecumenism.
There you go.
And he mentions Calvinist Hugo Grotius, who
I've never heard of.
Yeah, I should know him because he's the author of the concept of international law, which I'm opposed to in all its forms. I don't care how disruptive that would be. But he discussed a reunion with Richelieu, trying to reunite the Protestants with the Catholics. That just didn't go anywhere. But his idea of, like maybe we can have the religious leaders kind of work out the differences and hope the people would follow, which there's always a push for that with the Catholic Church, like with the Eastern Orthodox and the Lutherans and that, but it's not going anywhere yet. I guess if they all get diluted enough, not diluted like crazy, like diluted.
Well,
like,
a little bit of both, I guess.
Like diluted meaning not as strong and not as pure.
Because they are so diluted. Because they are so crazy.
Yes, true. Good point. The dilution of the diluted by the diluted.
There you go.
Anyway, so maybe one day we'll all be one generic religious church. Where we just kind of get together and say, "Hey, how you doing? Oh, pretty good. Want a sandwich? No, thanks."
I think that's just how non-denominational churches work.
No. We're down on the non-denominationals, but they're very devout, and a lot of them are very proud of being very biblical, following the Bible. So I don't think we should be overgeneralizing. Now the TV ones, they're very pop culture-y. Again, there's a mention of witchcraft because why not? This is the era of the height of the systematic persecution. But the efforts to emphasize rationalism, cut back on believing you're the strange people or your enemies are witches, and also a theory that God's sovereignty wouldn't allow witches to exist and have power and all that. There's some examples of some persecutions, and I'm sure we can, there's entire books written about those sorts of things. But I think I've mentioned before, as I'm getting older and the world seems to be getting weirder, I'm starting to believe more and more in like satanic possession and witchcraft.
Yeah, I can see it.
So again, another discussion of the French Church. I think this is more in detail, right?
Yes.
So the Council of Trent. Oh yeah, remember the Council of Trent did not involve the French Church.
Yes, because they're like, we're independent. We're our own thing. And
so that was only the Council of Trent, the findings or whatever you want to say, were only accepted in the French Church after the death of King Henry IV. And the author describes that once they adopted the reforms, there was a great flowering of religious exuberance, which is great. I guess pent up demand at that point, because they probably were somewhat aware of the reforms going on all around them. And it's like, okay, now we're gonna kick this in and we can do something. But they determined that the most important emphasis they should do at this time, kind of generally speaking, was practical charity and the education of their priests. That was their chief needs, is a belief at the time, which is probably something we need here. But a different kind of education of the priests.
It's interesting. I'm sure you were about to mention this, but like a lot of these, revival efforts were led by Richelieu. Because he does say, he was genuinely devout, but his support or opposition of reforming movements was largely dependent on how they related to royal policy at a given moment.
Right.
So it's like he did, some stuff because it was politically advantageous, but he did actually kind of usher in this religious revival in sort of a weird roundabout way.
Yeah, and there's a description of a number of figures in these reform movements and leaders and saints and stuff, and some of them have prominent churches in our immediate area, which of course is true all across the United States.
One of them is my confirmation saint.
De Sales?
Yeah.
St. Francis de Sales, which is the first one. He died in 1622, Adam.
Thanks for letting me know.
He was officially the Bishop of Calvinist Geneva. Did you know that he couldn't even visit his own parish?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
But he ended up converting thousands of Huguenots, not in Geneva, because he couldn't go there.
Because he was in France.
And I think he was a proponent, if my notes are correctly, of Christian humanism, kind of a cheerful belief system, where vices are rooted out by cultivating virtues. Anything to add about your favorite St. Francis de Sales?
I would say he's one of the first to write books directed to the laity. He had that whole pamphlet, essentially, the Introduction to the Devout Life, which is prayer books or explanations of theology specific for people who are not studying to be priests. And so he was one of the first to bring that sort of stuff to, to the laity. And I think he's the patron of Catholic writers because of that. So
That's good. You're a good writer.
thank you.
That's a good choice for your Saint Vincent de Paul, which is known by all Catholics as the charity arm
Yeah.
of the Catholic Church. I assume that's universal across the United States. It certainly is in this region. So if you need assistance, financial assistance, you can call up any of the local parishes and they'll connect you with St. Vincent de Paul. They do utility payments for you if you're behind in your electric bill.
They do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, furniture and clothes. They especially have like diapers and baby formula, all that kind of stuff. Great organization. All donations, no wasted money, not a dime.
Yeah, for as much people. Like, grief that we give a lot of the church hierarchy, I think, just the actions of St. Vincent de Paul, I think, kind of outweigh a little bit of that sometimes.
A lot.
Yeah,
well, and Catholic Charities in itself is a very efficient, one of the most efficient charities in the world. But I always wonder what, if the Vatican takes a cut, but that's just me being a cynic. So it was St. Vincent de Paul. I mean, these are important because they did affect human history, really, but of course, the church at the time, at this point of history. He was a young priest captured by Muslims and taken to North Africa. So what did he do there? He converted his former Franciscan slave owner, owned him, and his 3 wives, and they ended up repenting and moving back to Europe with him. This guy must have been
very convincing.
You make a good argument. I'll move back home with you.
And my 3 wives. Yes,
I don't know. We'll have to look and see what happened with the 3 wives, but certainly the former Franciscan went with him. Maybe he said, "See you later, ladies." I don't know. So he had a calling to revitalize the faith and serve the poor. So he was very popular among the aristocracy and moved among them, but he served the poor people and worked among them. So he was part of those social circles. He's kind of like Zorro. Anyway.
Well, I like the point that he makes. I don't even know what you're referencing.
Do you know what Zorro is?
I know I know of Zorro, but I don't know.
Well, you don't know the story of Zorro, the mark of Zorro? Yeah. He was in Mexico.
Wears a mask and has a sword, yeah.
He was an aristocrat in Mexico, and he was offended by the Spanish brutality of the peasants. And so he would put on this mask and sneak out and then, protect the poor and kill the bad, evil Spaniards. And then they were hunting him down, but he was a very, in the movie, he was a very, what do you,
I don't know.
When you act feminine, very,
I don't know.
Yeah. Like when you say a guy is, acting like a woman, there's a word for that.
I don't know. I don't know what
he acted very effeminate.
Effeminate. That's the word. He was acting very feminine. Yeah, you couldn't think of feminine.
I couldn't think of. Well, you couldn't either.
I couldn't either.
I'm telegraphing it. In the old black and white movie, he's very effeminate. So they never even suspected he was the brave swordsman that was Zorro.
Yes, but what I was going to say is I like the point that he makes is that he was the pastor of a rural parish where the church was in ruins. He repaired the whole building with his whole hands, with his own hands, and then affected a spiritual revival, which is pretty neat.
Not with half of his hands.
With his the whole building with his own hands is what I was trying to say.
Yes,
not the whole building with his whole hands.
So there's he formed the Order of Vincentians, which sometimes you hear of Vincentian priests. I think
also
in 1625.
Lazarists.
Yes. I never heard them as Lazarus.
I think I've heard of them as Lazarists. Yeah.
So then there were male and female orders, which are described in the book. I don't know if we need to talk about those. Yeah. There was you mentioned like the sales and his devotions, written devotions to help the lady because the Vatican the leadership didn't want a translation in the vernacular for the mass. So there were like explanatory devotional books, that type of thing. You want to discuss that any more than that?
No, I think that's just a good little summary.
Did you enjoy the section about the saint that we know as SMMA, Saint Mary Margaret Algonquin? That's that parish SMMA where you play soccer.
Yeah.
So did you catch that?
I did not catch that.
Oh, it's SMMA.
I didn't know that.
So that's in St. Louis. There's a very wealthy parish, actually, South County. Well, not very wealthy. It's a nice. They have better facilities than our poor parish in Jefferson County. But she was basically almost like a cult leader, although the author says, well, a cult is not necessarily pejorative, but she seemed like a nut. But she started the custom of the holy hour. It originated with her. Interesting. Now, the holy hour, is that the same concept of like the hour after your death that the angels and
I don't think so.
That's a different holy hour.
That's a different thing.
I should have looked that up.
Yes, you should.
So there's a long discussion, I think, of Baroque. Again, I don't know why we're discussing this again. Do you know why we're discussing again?
I don't.
But
I think it's just mentioning that it's at this point now it's in Germany.
Yes.
Because that's his whole point. It's like this is the peak in sort of the final cry of the Baroque architecture, Baroque art that happens in Germany.
And I've never been to Germany.
Neither have I.
And maybe someday.
I've never been out of the country.
I would like to go to Salzburg because I've seen pictures and, I like that Rick Steves European travel thing.
Europe, yes.
And they go to Salzburg. I think they have good waltzes in Salzburg.
Do they?
Yeah, music.
Yes. Are you a fan of waltzes?
I think wasn't the waltz created in Salzburg, maybe?
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's
they also have beautiful Baroque abbey churches in Bavaria and Austria. And there's a mention of music and theatrical crap that was Baroque at the time. And
theatrical crap? Is that the words from the author?
Theatrical crap, yeah. It's on page 310. Theatrical crap.
It is not in there.
And he mentions the irony that the paintings, religious paintings, declined in, I guess, quality or frequency because they're really focused on the architecture and other stuff. So just kind of mentions as an aside, it's kind of interesting that you don't have a lot of
nobody's
Baroque paintings.
Yeah, painting Catholic stuff anymore.
So then we move on to Augustinianism.
Yes.
And he calls it a crisis between the followers of philosophy of St. Augustine and Aquinas. I don't know. Is it really a crisis? But it's a kind of a argument about the presence or the emphasis on grace and free will.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to talk about that, but Pope Paul V ordered the dispute resolved between Dominicans and Jesuits, which is another issue that they were fighting over very esoteric theories. And
because I think the argument was that the Jesuits thought the Dominicans slighted free will because they much more emphasized like you need the grace of God and able to be saved. But then the Jesuits were much more on the side. Yeah, it says the Dominicans countered that the Jesuits did not fully recognize the need for grace. And so it's like one side, you're too free will. The other side, you're too dependent on God. Right. But then Paul V
determinism
and he's like, well, you could have both within a Catholic orthodoxy. So,
were you familiar with Jansenism before this?
I've heard of it.
I don't know if I even remember anything about it.
I think I've heard of it, but I don't know. I don't know too much about it. It's interesting.
It is, and you could see why it would be influential because you could make a lot of good points, but then it's like, well, I don't know. So their philosophy, as I'm summarizing this from the author, so if anybody's listening to this and thinking I'm wrong, you're probably right. So their general philosophy is that God is remote and inscrutable, unknowable, so they were. They were very influential, but it was considered a heresy. Generally, ultimately.
It started by Cornelius Jansen, I think.
Yes, should have mentioned that. And you could. Their belief was you could sin without even willing to do so. It's like almost like a determinism kind of argument that you're either destined to do it or you're not. It's just everything is God's work, I guess, even your own sins. And they were very austere in their personal lives, which I think is probably generally pretty good. Yeah. But Saint Cyran, I guess, was one of the leaders, if I remember correctly. He was imprisoned at some point.
Yeah. Jean-Ambrose de Horan, Abbé de Saint-Cyran, I think is his full name, who's a friend of Jansen.
Yes.
Who spread the ideas, especially through the convent of Port Royal, he says. And that's kind of where the center of Jansenism was for a long time. Thousands
were imprisoned during this period of time. Yep. They ended up forming a schismatic church. And I forget who I have this quote written here, which I thought was funny. They were described as pure as angels and proud as devils because they were stubborn in their beliefs. Yeah. Even a cemetery of them was dug up.
Yeah.
I wonder what they did. Did they burn the bones or something?
Might have, yeah.
They just dumped, or they put it in a different plot. I don't know. That seemed a little extreme.
Yeah.
But it's not unheard of in human history to dig up people that are buried, which I often reference this Spanish Civil War. So that's one of the things that precipitated the Spanish Civil War. They dug up the nuns and priests and displayed their corpses. It's a way to denigrate them.
Yeah.
That might have upset the Catholic believers. Anyway.
I don't know why.
So the Jansen spirituality, their belief was there was an immense gulf that separated man from God, and you had to be almost in continuous penance for all the sins that you're determined to have done. I don't know. Yeah. I did not know this. I've seen these before. Crucifixes with Jesus' arms raised up to symbolize that the opening to heavens was narrow. So I guess he had to kind of like scoot through it like he's on a bobsled.
Because that's what they say. They said that, I guess. But that he died, they denied that Christ died for all men.
Yes.
Because he thought that many were predestined to damnation.
Yeah.
So that's like, I think the double predestination that I was talking about, a couple episodes ago.
Yes.
That it's not just that God chooses some to go to heaven, but he also creates some for the purpose of going to hell, like knowing from the beginning that they're going to hell. I think that's the Jansenist double predestination there.
And they didn't believe in frequent communion, but almost continuous penance, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So their biggest opponents were Jesuits, and I love the Jesuit philosophy at that time, which is they saw God in ordinary things. They were the greatest antagonist of the Jansen philosophers. Because they wanted to influence all culture and make everything Christian and be involved in everything, art and all that. And the Jensens wanted to withdraw. They thought that anything in the culture was corrupting and we're all sinners and we need to be austere and all that kind of stuff.
I do want to mention, before we move too further ahead, you skipped over something that I thought you would appreciate. St. Vincent de Paul, who was at first friendly with St. Cyran, broke with him over that point about infrequent communion. And St. Cyran jibed that Vincent was ignorant, and Vincent replied, "I'm even more ignorant than you think," which I think is a great response to that.
That's the best way to respond to an insult, is to insult yourself double.
Yeah.
It really is disarming. Like if somebody is really, it's a good tactic. If you're really in a spot and someone is this actually probably happens to you very seldom, but it used to happen to me a lot when I was younger. But if you are self-deprecating, it is really disarming for somebody who you could have just insulted them and they're about to kick your butt and they say something back to you. The best thing to do, well, either if you can fight them, you can fight them. But the best thing to do at that point is to insult yourself, to agree with them, but one up it.
That's great.
That's practical advice. Because it's confusing. Yeah. It's like you stun them. And it also helps if you're right, that you're wrong.
Yes. There you go.
Because that even is more stunning. Because what are they going to do? Argue with you? They're like, wait, they don't expect you to insult yourself.
It's like a Daffy Duck and what's the rabbit's name?
Well, Bugs Bunny.
Bugs Bunny, yeah.
Yes. Rabbit season, duck season.
Yes, exactly.
Rabbit season, duck season. Duck season. Rabbit season, fire! No, it's the other way around.
Yes. Confused yourself.
Oh, damn it. I ruined the example. Duck season, fire. And then it shoots his beak and it spins around his head.
Yes.
Blaise Pascal. I have his book in the basement and I've read the introduction and I've not read a word of what Blaise Pascal has written. It's Pensies. I got that because I read Hawley's book, and he references Pensies as a brilliant philosophical exposition of his beliefs in Catholicism and something like that. And I just haven't got around to it. But it has this. The book I have has this weird drawing. I don't know. I should have looked up what it is. But your mother says, she looks at the book and is sitting on the counter, and she says, "Does that say penis?" It has this weird kind of diagram where they're like, no, Pensies. So if you ever read Blaise Pascal, you can think of your mother saying, "Does it say penis?"
That's great, Dad.
So Blaise Pascal was close to the Jansen movement. He was worldly and converted, which seems to be a theme in Catholic history of Catholic Church. People that are corrupt and then they convert, like St. Augustine and Augustine, or whoever you want to pronounce it. And everybody else seems like. But all those people were better than Mother Teresa, who was from the wealthy and then just hung out with the poor while she allowed them all to die.
Yes.
I am not, I'll repeat, I'm not a fan of Mother Teresa.
I don't think I've gathered that, actually.
I'm mentioning that to our listener, in case our listener missed that episode.
The episodes. You've talked about Teresa many times.
He was an ill person. And I do know this from the introduction of the book that I didn't read, but I read the introduction. He was constantly sick and in pain. Yeah. And I did not know that he, at one point, said he didn't want to be cured because that was a natural state of man, meaning that he was created that way. I think he might have had other days he might have thought differently. He was one of the most formidable antagonists of the Jesuits, but I can't even remember why. Is there anything in the book that says why he was philosophically opposed to the Jesuits? I guess because he's thinking it's all ordained. You know?
Well, because he very much agreed with a lot of what they had to say, but while still being Catholic, didn't go quite as far as that, but definitely believed a little bit more in the predestination side of things. But he also says here, he said when his niece, who's also a nun of Port Royal, underwent what he regarded as a miraculous cure, he thought that it proved that Jansenists could not be heretics. So he says because his niece was, miraculously cured, that shows that God is on the side of the Jansenists, and they could not be wrong. That's on the top of page 315.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know. Yes, very good. So the next section, I skipped over mysticism because who cares about mystics? And because mystics don't actually accomplish anything.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a mystic that accomplished anything?
I don't know. I think Francis of Assisi was a mystic.
Was he a mystic?
I think so.
Who else was a mystic was that guy in Russia. What's his name?
I have no idea.
He was right before the Russian Revolution. He's part of the reason why there was a Russian Revolution. He was a mystical.
Rasputin?
Yeah, Rasputin. He was a mystic.
That's right.
Yeah, he didn't accomplish much either. He got all them people killed.
Yeah.
Quietism.
Yes.
I thought quietism was an interesting concept, and I like some of the precepts of it. And but the one quote I had, so it's a Miguel de Molinos, who died in 1696, was a Spanish priest who originated quietism, which is essentially you just want to be have a complete passive surrender to the will of God. So you just sit there and shut up. And so all of your human effort is towards salvation, even the effort to resist temptation, which sounds absurd because it is. But the quote that they have here is, I desire to desire nothing, but I do not even desire that.
Yeah. It's like you have no desires. You're just essentially just going with the flow. It kind of seems like,
Can you, I think it's, I don't think you can actually conceive of that concept, in your own mind. It's one of those kind of those circular reasoning things. Yeah. Like it's infinity. Yeah. It's an infinity thought. Yeah, I desire to desire nothing, but I don't even desire that.
Yeah. It's absurd. Excuse me as I yawn.
I think I should put that on a t-shirt. That should be our quote for the book.
Just steal someone else's quote.
Or it should be, I desire to know nothing, but I do not even desire that.
No, that doesn't make much sense.
I know. That's what's good about it.
Well, if you're going to make it know something, I know that I know nothing, but I don't even know that.
Well, that's
to all be known. Yeah.
That's good.
There you go. Well, that's kind of just Socrates. Isn't that what he said? Yeah, I know that I know nothing. Yeah.
That just proves there's no original thoughts anymore.
That is true.
It's all been thought.
Yeah. You'll find something eventually.
People think that I have original thoughts just because they haven't heard them before. The more educated the people that are around me, the less interesting I am.
Yeah.
The more knowledgeable people are, the less interesting I am.
That's unfortunate.
People that are stupid and ignorant are my greatest fans.
That's great, Dad. That's really great.
Until I tell them that.
Yes. I like that guy.
And then they insult me, and then I have to insult myself better.
Yeah.
I'm on the run. See you later, weirdos. All right. That was like that. That's a synopsis of me at parties in my early 20s.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I get you probably have never insulted somebody just to amuse yourself with their reaction.
No, not really.
It's not a good thing to do.
No,
I'm not advocating
done
for
that.
Yes. I haven't either. I'm just mentioning it.
Do you have anything else to say about the Quietists?
No.
Okay.
The last section is skepticism.
Hate the skeptics.
I don't really even have any notes. I just have skepticism, and then I have notes in the book, but I don't know. It's not really a historical. I mean, there's some references to skeptics. Where they're casting doubt on all certainties, and it does make a point that the skepticism ends up resulting in people saying, well, we have to have some sort of authority for whatever we believe. And so they kind of turn to the church or the Bible.
Yeah. On the other hand, because I think what we're going to get into next time, because the next section, this is the last section for this reading, is the scientific revolution. Correct. So I think that's where the skeptics lead a lot first is, well, why do we know anything that the church teaches? Why is that known? And that's where you get, Copernicus, Galileo, going on through Descartes, Bacon, Newton. Yes. So all of those kind of people kind of emerge out of the skepticism. Man, I hate the skeptics. But
really?
Yeah, because that's what we talked about a lot.
They're useful.
They can be.
You have to be somewhat skeptical.
Well, the skeptics now. Well, that's true. But it's like a lot of the skeptics are like, well, nothing is certain. There's no truth about anything. I think that's the branch of skepticism that we deal with a lot now. And that's like the real moral relativist skepticism and stuff like that.
Really
I just find repulsive.
The know-nothing.
Yes.
And, they're more cynic.
Maybe.
I'm a cynic, though.
You are a cynic.
I'm a optimistic cynic.
That doesn't make any sense.
Really?
Yeah.
I am optimistic that people are good.
Yes.
I'm cynical enough to know that they aren't.
Huh.
You have to have a certain level of optimism in order to be an effective cynic.
I guess. Yeah. I guess it makes sense.
Because you're disappointed all the time.
So
I go around my life just being continuously disappointed in myself and everyone else in the world.
That's a really healthy attitude, Dad.
Actually, no, I think that's kind of true of me.
Yeah, maybe. It's probably not good.
Well, it's not great.
You should be disappointed at yourself for thinking like that.
I already am.
There you go. All right.
That ends our section
of this podcast. We'll pick up with Reason and Revolution again next week, finishing up this chapter 10 of this book.
Is there any final thoughts you have on the setting the stage for the...
Not that this is good. It's a good overview of a lot of the ideologies, a lot of the political climate of the time, kind of leading into, the scientific revolution that's coming up. And I think we get into the French Revolution here too. I think maybe even the American Revolution might be discussed a little bit, although that doesn't have too much to do with Catholics, honestly. With all because there weren't. Well, I think there was one Catholic who signed the Declaration of Independence.
I think that's right.
Remembering correctly,
they're generally Protestants.
Yeah, generally mostly Protestants in the United States. Yeah. So, but I know French Revolution for sure, and I think we end with Napoleon in the next section. So it goes through a pretty big chunk of history that we'll see here.
Big time.
Yes. All right. Well, this has been Season 6, Episode 14 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
You can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions.
Are we going to have a contest?
We should, because we're making our way through this book.
We'll make our decision in advance of the next episode and announce it next week.
I think we should make a mug.
That's a good idea. Mm-hmm. You know what? Umbrellas.
Why umbrellas?
They're very practical.
Yeah.
If I've been given gifts as swag, of an umbrella. Fantastic.
Well, there you go. If you want to win an umbrella, follow us on Twitter, and we'll figure out some sort of competition.
I have like 20 mugs downstairs.
Yeah, that's true.
Who wants another mug? If you want a mug, you can get it for like $2 at Walmart.
That's true.
An umbrella, if it's one of those things, if you don't have it, you need it. You need it now. You need to always have it.
Yes.
And so you could just throw the Unlimited Opinions umbrella in your car and forget about it until it rains. And it's like, oh, thank God.
And then you give us free advertising.
That's correct.
You're walking around with an umbrella.
Yes, people will ask, why do you have an Unlimited Opinions? And we'll have to have an ignorant quote on the other side.
Yes,
Unlimited
of course.
Opinions. And not on the other side of the exterior.
Yes.
So it opens up.
So it opens up and you can
maybe a picture of me and you. Giant face of me on one side, a giant face of you on the other.
I don't even think we'd have anyone willing to compete for that.
We haven't had much interest.
That's true.
I'm just thinking we get 10 of them. We each have one.
You
get
go.
us for each of us. And your mother would love it.
That is true. All right. Well, you might be able to win an Unlimited Opinions umbrella. So stay tuned for that.